Still do 7 NUFC Matters shows for free a week. But if you want to support the channel, there are a few ways of doing it. Hit the like button on each live broadcast or video. This helps the channel grow. Hit the subscribe button and select the all notifications options. Hit the thanks button to buy a super sticker. You can do this on the live chat too. You can also join our Patreon page or buy us a coffee at the link in all of our video descriptions below. We are also looking for sponsors. If you want our latest advertising rates and how you can get involved, then email John at nufcmatters1892@gmail.com. Thanks for watching. Good evening, welcome to NUFC Matters Ask Gibbo. Good evening, John.
How are you, my friend?
Good, mate, very good. Just want to dedicate this particular episode to the man on the left, former Newcastle United supporter now. Alan has passed away, Alan Gardner. He was 78 years of age. Picked this up from nufc.com. Here he is. He's pictured in happier times with his nephew and great-nephew. 3 generations of the family related to the former Newcastle player Alex Gardner, who won 3 Division 1 titles for the club between 1899 and 1909. Alex, his relative, made 314 appearances for Newcastle. Amazing record in an amazing time for Newcastle, John.
Oh, I mean, the incredible, that was Newcastle at their best. And the sadness is it was so long ago, Steve, but that was the wonderful, wonderful Edwardian team that made the championship and the FA Cup final season after season after season. A wonderful time, and therefore to be part of that team is quite outstanding, because it was outstanding, the best team in the country, without a shadow of a doubt. And I think I just missed seeing him by a couple of years in that Edward. But there we are. Wouldn't it be lovely if just a smidgen of those days returned, Steve?
It would be. It would be great. Yeah, I mean, you know what? Alan Gardner, he's the first time when I saw that on nufc.com that I knew his name. And he's one of those people, John, that whenever I used to go to a game, whether at home or away, and I seen him, he'd be shuffling up towards the ground. I'd always see him. He'd always say hello. And, you know, away from home, if you seen him, he'd always give you a nod. And that's the way it is on the away terraces as far as being a Newcastle fan's concerned. You see people, you've probably seen them for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. But you know what? When you see them, it's a nod, it's a wink, and you maybe standing next to them at the game, you have a chat with them. Oh, that was terrible, or that was great, or, you know, but you don't know their names. It's amazing, you know, until you get to know people. Like, that's what the beauty of this podcast has been for me, you know, getting to know people and getting to see people coming up going, oh, I love that one with you and Gibbo, or you and Supermac were great last week, and I bet he's not looking forward to coming back on the show with Chris Wood doing so well. And, you know, I love the amigos, and that's the difference, you know. Now you're getting to know people through through social media, John, you know.
Well, I knew that guy's face immediately I saw it, but I didn't know the name. And as you rightly say, that's it, because a lot of these guys, when you hit the ground, and because you're associated with the club, if you're coming up the ground to go in the press box, they'll always come across and have a chat, and they're instantly recognizable, but the names don't mean anything, bless them. But they're the heartbeat of the club. That's why we are such a great club, having won absolutely nought for yonks, because of supporters like him, who and the number of them we have. All clubs have wonderful supporters, but in the depth of a club like Newcastle United, with absolutely no encouragement, and I mean, you know, that is cradle to grave stuff, and lovely to see these people. And absolutely correct, Steve, that you pay tribute to them on this show, because they're the guys that we're here for, to be truthful. That's why we're here talking about Newcastle United, because it's the love of us all sort of thing. So nice to pay tribute to him, and his family stay strong in his memory.
Yep, here. Dedicate this show to him and his family. Let's look back then. We've got to do it at the game at the weekend.
Are you insisting we've got to do it?
As you know, I wasn't as confident as others. People were going into this game thinking it was going to be 3s and 4s, and this is the time to beat Man City. And we all felt we could get something down there. And I don't think that our hope and optimism was misjudged, because the form book told you Newcastle were going to go down there and on form be able to get something out of it. But we got hit with a whirlwind. The Egyptian Marmoush, had already had a go early doors, John, and didn't manage to get a goal. But then a hat trick in the first half, and it demoralised us, doesn't it? There was no way back.
No, but I mean, I started off with disappointment, and then I started off with frustration because it was an opportunity missed. I'm not saying that Newcastle were going to win by 3 or 4, but if you're ever going to win at the Etihad, this side capitulates. This Manchester City side had capitulated time and time again. Even a few days before against Real Madrid, they were 2-1 up with 5 minutes to go and lost 3-2. They were fragile. This, if ever you were going to get an opportunity, this was the opportunity. And then I was irritated because of the manner in which it came. I mean, you're right, we got blown away by a first half hat trick. But goodness gracious, Steve, didn't we contribute to it? Take that first goal as straight down the middle punt by the keeper. Where's our centre halves? We've got our 2 big centre halves who should be marking up. They're not. Okay, we've got a man there. Trippier, he's goal side of the attacker. He suddenly decides when he's about 5'4" that he's going to go in front of him and head the thing away, and of course doesn't get anything near it. The kid goes on from there. The keeper commits himself dreadfully, so he's standing in no man's land saying, "Please love me," and he loves him. I mean, yes, he's the new Egyptian kid on the
Mo
block.
Salah.
But I tell you what, he'll have to be grateful that he played against us, because I mean, we opened the barn door and said, "Do you want to drive your tractor in here?" And he did. I mean, we contributed to our downfall. Yes, they were clever. Yes, I thought Pep got his team selection right, because what he did, and I thought this was significant before the game started, he took out Kevin De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva from his midfield, because while they're great tacticians, sorry, they have not the legs anymore to compete in a midfield with Bruno and Tonali when those two were in the games. And no doubt Pep had looked when we went across town in Manchester and played Man U, and they put Casemiro and Eriksen in midfield, who are similarly gifted, but incredibly one-paced, and they couldn't live with our midfield. We won 2-0. So he took his 2 quality players, but now no legs, out and put legs into the team. They've been missing legs for a long time now, Man City. They also spent 180 million pound in January when we didn't spend a bean, and we all know why we didn't. But the point is, we didn't for the 3rd successive window. They were able to spend 180. They got for 59 or whatever the guy that scored a hat trick, and Gonzalez in midfield give a mini imitation of Rodri. And so you get what you spend on. And that team was transformed by the signings in January, but we were passive. We were passive. We accepted what was going to happen to us. We were off the pace. But you know what bothered me more than anything? In my opinion, Steve, we lacked desire. I'm not saying we ran up a white flag, because I don't think we did. But if it was going to come our way, we shrugged and said it's going to come our way. And that's 3 league defeats out of 4. And you can't tell me it's a coincidence that on the horizon is the League Cup final, which for Liverpool I mean, if we're going to be brutally truthful, for Liverpool, the League Cup final's just another cup final, isn't it? Nothing special. What's special for them is the Champions League final and the Premier League title. But for us, after 70 years wait, it is ginormous. And the players subconsciously want to make certain that they don't miss the final through injury or through whatever. So if the going goes against them, there's not a great desire to get back into the game. There's not a great desire to put your heart on the line. It wasn't a performance like the two performances against Arsenal in the semi-final of the League Cup, Steve. We're capable of doing that, but we weren't passive then, were we? We were terrific then. We were passive in off the pace down there. We give City what they wanted when we should have given City a heck of a game. We give them what we wanted. Can I put it this way? And this is my little rant. You've got me started here, Steve.
Yeah.
I mean, Trippier and Willock were off by half time. That tells you an awful lot that we're 3 goals down by half time. 2 senior players in terms of not being kids, although they haven't been automatic in the side, but Trippier and Willock's off by half time. Any of our blue chip players could have come off. And at the end of the game, when, as a Newcastle fan, which I am, I look at that game and I think, well, I tell you what, he did all right anyway. And it's an 18-year-old kid who goes on as a sub, Lewis Smiley, and he showed more desire and more fight and more willingness to put himself about than any of the senior players. I mean, where was the captain's performance from Bruno? Where was Tonali's performance? That was probably the poorest Tonali we've had this season. Lewis Hall was butchered by Savinho. Isaac never got a kick, and I know the service wasn't there. And Gordon just looked tired and unfit. I mean, the blue chip players didn't come to the party.
No, they certainly didn't, John. That was the big disappointment, I think, for fans up and down the country across social media at the weekend, that the players did just seem to chuck it. Even Alan Shearer picked it up on Match of the Day. Alexander Isak standing up front, gesticulating at one point instead of getting back in and getting involved. You've picked out those two players. You picked out Kieran Trippier and Willock because they both got subbed, and Tino Livramento obviously came on, and Lewis Miley came on. We did seem to play better in the second half. I mean, if you split it into two halves, that first half hat trick, there was no way back. I think we both accepted that. It's a freak if you do get back in those games. Look at Arsenal and at Newcastle those years ago. But the second half, we only lost it 1-0, and it was an 86-minute goal, tired legs, whatever you want to call it. But we did play better in the second half. So I guess the question is, did Eddie get it wrong? Did Eddie get it wrong, John? Is Eddie one who takes responsibility for that defeat at the weekend, or is it the players, or is it a bit of both?
Well, 2 things first on the fact that we're better in the second half. They were 3-0 up. They didn't have to go and win it. They had it won. They took their foot off the accelerator because they had the game won. And as long as we didn't look as if we were going to rattle that cage, the job was done. They just play on, and eventually they'll get one. Lewis Miley, I thought our best 2 players, and by the way, when I say our best 2 players, I say that with reservations because they weren't outstanding. They ran about with Livramento and Lewis Miley. The subs had come on. I mean, what irritates me as well, and by the way, I have been, like you and like other people, saying how magnificent Newcastle were when they won 9 on the trot. We have handed out accolades on this show and in the newspapers and in various other places, and fans have given accolades to Newcastle United players and said how truly magnificent they are, culminating in Arsenal home and away. But if we give accolades, the players have got to take it when they produce a performance like that. Any side can lose, but there's a way to lose, isn't there? And this wasn't the way to lose. There's a way to lose where you still put everything in the game. You have 1 or 2 players off form. You're playing stupendous opposition, etc., etc. You can lose. Of course, you can lose over a season as long as ours is. but this isn't the way to lose. And, afterwards, and I suppose he was right, but I listened to Bruno and he's saying this isn't good enough and they were lazy, the team was lazy. And he said all the right things, but he was part of that as well, Steve. Where was the captaincy leading from the front with the flag on a big pole, sticking it in the territory and saying this is ours? And he hinted at it. He said it's no good keeping ourselves for the final. Did you notice that? He said in the interview, no good keeping yourself for the final, which indicated that there was a feeling the players. What other feeling could you have that you're keeping yourself for the final? And you know what worries me? At my age, you can remember things from way back, etc., etc. What worries me is this feeling. I know that you're keeping it because it's subconscious in lots of cases. But if somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, keep out of my way," do you want to play at Wembley, son? Well, keep away from me today because if you'll be taken out on a stretcher and you won't play. Okay, it's a different ballgame. I'm not going to do that. If you keep yourself fit for a final, then you lose matches. In 1974, which was Newcastle's first Wembley final after the Jackie Milburn era, where they won 3 in 5 years, 1974 was in the FA Cup. Between the semi-final and the final, we had 8 league games.
Yeah.
We won 1. Now, just 2 years ago, when we made the Carabao Cup final, when we won the semi-final, we were third top, so we were going great guns.
Yeah.
And we only played 3 games between the semi-final and the final, but we didn't win one of them. And this was a team in raging good form, third top of the league. Didn't win one of them. Now, form isn't like a tap. You can't turn it off and then when we get to the final, turn it on for the final and everything's great. It doesn't work like that. And if we get a few batterings between now and Wembley on March the 16th, we will get beaten at Wembley because Liverpool's a good side. Liverpool just will relentlessly go on and on and on and on. So they'll be. Now, we know this side is good enough to produce performances that did at home and away against Arsenal. In the semi-final, were absolutely brilliant. We won 9 on the trot. We're absolutely brilliant. But at the moment, this next 26 days are going to determine the whole of our season, Steve. Because in that time, we can either confirm a Champions League status, win the Carabao Cup, and keep going in the FA Cup, or we can blow all 3. We can be out of the Champions League running. We can have lost the final at Wembley and we can be out the FA Cup. We're playing in all 3 competitions in the next 26 days. That'll make or break us. So if that doesn't concentrate minds now to get on with it, Eddie has a phrase, and he's 100% right. You concentrate on the next game. Not the game after or the game after. You concentrate on the next game. The next game's Forest. We'll win that. And then we think of Liverpool in the league. And then we eventually think of Brentford in the FA Cup. And then Liverpool again in the Carabao Cup. We can do great in 3 competitions, or we can blow up in all 3 over the next 26 days, Steve.
Yeah, it's an all or nothing couple of weeks. It's listen, these things happen, and when you're chasing glory on 3 different fronts, these things happen. Champions League, FA Cup, League Cup, could all be over by the time we get into the later mornings. And let's hope that isn't the case. A lot of questions coming in. Going to move on from the Man City game. I don't think anybody will blame us for doing that. Jeff hit us with a hat trick of questions. He went, John, did you watch many games from the crowd? And if you did, what was your favourite area of the ground at St James's Park?
Great question, Jeff. And as a little lad, I did, because as a little lad, my Uncle Frank, I lived in Benwell in the West End of Newcastle. And the only person in my family, not my dad, not anyone else, there was one person in the family who was Newcastle United mad, and that was me, my Uncle Frank. And he used to pick me up on Adelaide Terrace where I lived, and we used to walk along to the Big Lamp and then down to St James's Park to watch Newcastle United, my heroes, play. And we always went behind the goal at the Leazes end. We always stood in the Leazes end as close as you could get to the net, behind the net. And everybody in those days, as you would know, was standing, and there was no seating. And I must have moved 40 yards to the left and 40 yards to the right as the game went on. I was just picked up as the crowd moved and swayed one way and swayed the other way. And the excitement was huge in seeing people like Jackie and Bobby Mitchell weaving their magic and coming pouring down as if they were coming directly at me because I'm behind the goal. Magic to watch, wonderful days, and that cemented my relationship and love with Newcastle United for the rest of the time. But yeah, it was the Leazes end behind the goal.
Okay, next question from Jeff was question for Gibbo. How many words an issue did you used to have to write for the Evening Chronicle in your pump, John?
Oh, there's a terrific amount. But in the match itself, which was an hour and a half for the football pink, we had an open line. I went on the phone at 10 to 3 and came off at 5 o'clock. And I just talked as I'm talking now. And back in the office, we had a copy taker who was sitting with the headphones on, was touch type very, very quick, and just took down. I never wrote anything. I just ad-libbed the whole lot. Now, over an hour and a half of a match and only put the phone down for the 10 minutes of half time, you're going to be writing 3,000 or 4,000 words. It depended each day how many stories there was, but I still had a minimum count of 4 stories per night wanted on the back page and the inside back page of the Chronicle, absolutely minimum. And if they weren't there, they had to be there. You had to make certain you get them and stockpile them if it's necessary. But I mean, I've always suffered from verbal diarrhea, so that was never the problem. Keeping me down to just 12 paragraphs. That was the problem. The problem was never let me splurge. And then, of course, I ghosted loads of footballers' columns. Notoriously Super Mac when he was the mighty Super Mac at Newcastle United, which started the friendship and resulted in me still doing columns for Super Mac today in the Chronicle. But we did them with all sorts of players and all sorts of stars. I mean, I remember for a while ghosting a column in the Chronicle for Ray Kennedy because he was a big Geordie and he was an absolute superstar that did the double with Arsenal and then was part of the Liverpool side that won everything it was possible to win, like the First Division Championship, the European Cup, the domestic cups. And he was a good pal of mine. I ghosted Ray Kennedy's story. I then wrote 16 books, and each book had about 40, 50, 60,000 words in. Some under my own name, some ghosting for people like Bob Moncur, and incredibly, considering how black and white I am, when Sunderland won the cup in '74, I knew Portes, the guy that scored the goal, Ian Porterfield, very, very well, because in those days we did a lot of talkings that were double talkings. They don't happen now. By that, I mean one Newcastle player and one Sunderland player, with me as the referee in the middle. And I mean, they wouldn't dare do that now because the fans would be fighting each other after 4 brown ales apiece in the audience. But in those days, they did often. Porters, I mean, I did Mick Quinn with Goodman, you know, the guy, Don Goodman, who's on the telly on lots of things now. I did Supermac, I did Managers on a stage together. And I wrote Ian Porterfield's autobiography, The Impossible Dream, which was how he went on to win the cup at Sunderland, and I was there to watch him, and it was bittersweet, I can tell you. It was bitter because it was Sunderland, and it was sweet because it was a pal of mine. But happy days, but I've gurgitated an awful lot of words, and I'll tell you something, there's an awful lot more to come, pal, because I've already waxed lyrical for a special paper we're bringing out for Wembley. So I've regurgitated that. I've already written a 12-part series, which has been postponed for the moment, on the great Newcastle United legends, which is going to be a standalone newspaper. It was going to come out in March, but it's been postponed because now the Wembley specials coming out, but it will come out sometime in the autumn. And I think I must have written about 20,000 words for that. So I've always been a little bit like Niagara Falls, the
Yeah.
word
Is
spewing out.
it, I tell you what, just from my point of view as well, I mean, people often criticise, those who write for the Chronicle. Alan Oliver got it in the neck, you got it in the neck. Lee Ryder's now the latest incumbent who's took on that kind of the big role, if you like, where he is Mr. Newcastle United. But I think the problem with the Chronicle, John, correct us if I'm wrong, but no matter whether there's news coming out of St James's Park or there isn't, that still doesn't mean that they're not pages that you've got to fill if that's your job. So let's
Yep.
go back to the days of Mike Ashley, John, when Mike Ashley wasn't talking, and at one point was banning journalists from the club. Poor Lee was still having to write stories, John, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I got banned for 12 months by Mike Ashley because my job in those days was to write comment pieces. Well, if
Yeah,
I'm going to comment on Newcastle United, what am I going to say? You've got to understand Mike is not wanting to spend much money here, and you've got to understand that as long as we don't get relegated, that's a sense of achievement. I told it the way it was, and I got banned for 12 months from the press box at St James's Park. I still got in it every game because I knew people that were willing to get me in, if you know what I mean. But I mean, I took that as a badge of honour to be banned by Mike Ashley. If I hadn't been, I would have thought I'm not doing my job because I ought to have been, because you ought to be saying things. But yes, it's a fine balance between uh, telling the truth as you see it. There's
yeah,
two jobs. One is a reporter, where you report on what's happening. Today we're trying to sign some A, B, and C. On Saturday we lost 4-0 at Man City, and here's how the goals were scored. So there's reporting by definition, that is just telling what's happened. And then there's opinion pieces, which are more and more important, and they did become that in the Ashley thing because there was nothing much happening, and they're very big today, opinion pieces, where I think above all else, you've got to be truthful. And I mean, I've been asked to do opinion columns for donkey's years now, donkey's recent years, at St James's Park. Now, to me, if you're going to do an opinion column, Steve, you've got to tell the truth. Now, the truth as you see it, because by definition, it's opinion. And my opinion might not be yours, or might not be some fan's opinion, but you've got to tell your honest opinion and not fudge it. And it cost me a friendship with Steve Bruce, because I was very close to Steve Bruce when he was a player, and I got known through Wallsend Boys Club and when he was at Manchester United, and you couldn't find better company off the field than Steve Bruce. But when he became manager of Newcastle, I didn't want him to take the job because I didn't think he was capable of doing it the way we wanted done up here. And I sort of said, please don't take it. He did take it. Once he takes it, I've either got to stop having an opinion column or give my opinion, not support somebody because they're a friend. You can't support failure because you like a person. And Newcastle, part of the problem was Ashley, of course, not just Steve. But if you are doing your job, do it honestly, because the first people that are going to see through you, the fans. You start fudging it, and one or two journalists in the Northeast who had good relationships with Steve Bruce didn't tell it the way it was because they didn't want to stick the boot in on Steve. That you shouldn't be taking your pennies if you do that. And it hurt because it hurt me, and I know it hurt him, but it hurt me because I lost a friend. But I either had to say at the Chronicle, I don't want to write any more opinion pieces on Newcastle United, or I had to tell it the way I saw it.
yeah. Fair play to you. Alan said, "I wish John would do a book about music and film legends he's met. I loved the previous one."
Well said, Alan, because that is my hobby. Doing Newcastle United is my love, and it's also my profession. But doing the one I did with you, Steve, which is the only one I did, where we did all the rock and rollers and the various things, and bringing Jerry Lee Lewis over and seeing Buddy Holly in concert and Eddie Cochran just before they died, and then doing the film stars and knocking about London with Tom Courtney and Ian McShane, and was terrific fun. And they're good stories, and they're not well-known stories. So perhaps somewhere along the line, Steve, that's one for me and you to visit again.
Yeah, 100%. Halfway through the show, we'll have a quick ad break. Back after this. A big thanks to all our sponsors, Skips and Bins. Say hello to low-cost waste disposal with pay-as-you-go and contract waste management. Find them at their website, skipsandbins.com. Contact them, www.skipsandbins.com/contact. A big thanks to Mr. Vicky's Sauces, handmade in Cumbria. You can find them at their website, mrvickies.co.uk. Email info@mrvickies.co.uk or telephone 01768 210 102. A big thanks to our fanzine sponsor, United Group Travel. 2 crew, driver and courier, local family company, 3-star plus quality hotels and no interchanges. All excursions included. Find them at their website, www.unitedgrouptravel.com. Email them at beverly.ugtl@gmail.com. Telephone 01670 632 460 or mobile 0791 666 4174. Just £30 per person deposit. There are no strangers on our tours, just friends you haven't met yet. A big thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the technical side of things. You can find them at their website, media-arts.co.uk. If you want to listen to us as a podcast, you can go to Sports Social Podcast Network. You can also find us on iTunes, Spotify, and your other podcast providers. If you want to help support the channel, hit the thumb up, which is the like button. Click share to share to your other social medias. Click join to join the channel. And click the subscribe button. We've also got links in our description for buy us a coffee and to be a Patreon member. Some events coming up. An afternoon with Sir Les Ferdinand, 6th of April, 12 till 4. Tickets available from ticketmaster.co.uk. No Covers takes place at the Clooney, Lilac Lane, Ryder and the Chris Norris Band. Tickets from theclooney.com or by telephone in 0191 230 4474. An evening with Steve Howie and Steve Watson, hosted by Joe Allen, takes place at the Tyneside Irish Centre on the 27th of June. Tickets for that are from newcastlelegends.com. An evening with Peter Beardsley and Chris Waddle takes place at the Tyne Theatre and Opera House on the 23rd of January 2026. Box office 0844 246 1000 or website tynetheatreandoperahouse.tv. An evening with Bad Manners takes place on Friday the 30th of January 2026 and tickets available from ticketmaster.co.uk. And we have copies of The Entertainers 1992 to 1997, Kevin Keegan's Legacy, available from newcastlelegends.com. Okay, welcome back to NUFC Matters. It is Ask Gibbo. We'll get a few more of your questions in a minute. I just want to say thank you to Sonia Rowe today for showing us around the Havelock Place Dementia Centre, which is on North Tyneside. As you know, we have supported Dementia Matters on this show over the last 12 months, but sadly in December, the doors closed for the final time, mainly down to the financial situation they found themselves in. We did get to the bottom of it. I think I explained it a couple of weeks ago on the show. Unfortunately, COVID played its part. They put their HMRC payments on hold, and that in essence is what eventually caught up with them, and that along with other things which they put on the back burner, and it just became unsustainable. They couldn't run it. So sadly, Dementia Matters is no more. Thankfully, all the residents did get rehoused, and the daycare services have been farmed off to other places. But yeah, I've had a look at Havelock Place today. We are going to be making an announcement a little bit later this week about what we're going to do, but we are going to be supporting that particular charity. It's North Tyneside Age UK, and they deal specifically at Havelock Place with over 40 people who have dementia, and it's a safe community. It's a community where It was built 4 or 5 years ago, and the Duke of Northumberland financed it. And it's a wonderful, wonderful venue, a wonderful place for people to go, families to go and visit as well. We will be talking a lot more about that, and we have agreed to give the proceeds from the Howie and Watson event, which takes place at the Irish Centre this summer. That will be our end of season event. All the proceeds from that are going to go to the dementia charity. So a bit more about that over the coming months, but delighted to be reattached to something with regards to dementia, because obviously with football and us losing so many great players, and certainly in more recent times who've been diagnosed with that horrible illness, it's great to be able to support it on here. So get back to the questions anyway. Jeff, last question from Jeff. What was the worst foul you witnessed at St James's Park, Gibbo?
Oh, there's been some belters. And these are all off the top of your head, obviously, without time to think about it. But I certainly remember Jinky Smith on Tony Want when we played Birmingham 6 times in 6 weeks back in the 70s, the Brummie Bashers. And Tony Want had done Irving That was down there, and bad injury. And when they came up here in the Texargo Cup, within 53 seconds, Jinky went over to Want and, shall we say, took a retribution. I mean, I can remember hearing the crack round the ground when the tackle hit the leg. And Jinky didn't spend any time waiting for a referee's decision. He just walked straight off the pitch because he knew the red card was coming. Others I've seen, all sorts. I think it was it at Newcastle when Billy Whitehurst did Paul Bracewell?
Yeah.
And really done him. And I tell you what, Billy was a wild man. If Billy done you, you stayed done at least for 6 months. Like, I mean, it was terrifying. I mean, it was a one-man army. And always remember, when Newcastle going off on what Billy was like. Always remember when Billy left us, he went to Oxford. And very shortly after that, Newcastle were going down to play Oxford at Oxford. And I remember talking to Glenn Roder when he come back, who was our centre half. Billy was the centre forward. And Glenn said to me, Gibbo, he said, I was absolutely terrified when I went down there because this man is a thug. He abuses the privilege of grievous bodily harm on the football field. Like he said, so I spent the whole game talking to Billy and saying, hey, we miss you in Brough Park going for the dogs. And remember when we had the bet on this dog and it come in unexpected? And Billy saying, aye, aye, aye. And unfortunately, the other centre half in the Newcastle side was Peter Jackson, who would come out. It was a bit of a tough guy himself, and had come out in the Chronicle on the Friday before the Saturday and said, I'm not afraid to be playing against Billy Whitehurst. So what happened, Billy was quite calm with Glenn Roder, who was saying nice things to him. But Peter Jackson had said something publicly, and which had riled him a little bit. So he ended up having to pick his nose off several parts of his face from a forearm smash from Whitehurst, and he suffered as a consequence. But Billy was the worst fouler you could ever wish to see. But there's been crazy fouls. I mean, I remember playing Inter Milan in the Fairs Cup way back this season after we won the Fairs Cup, and a skirmish set off. They couldn't handle Wyn Davies in the air. I mean, big Wyn Davies in the air. They didn't do anything in the air, these sides, and Inter Milan couldn't handle it. And I remember there was a foul in the box where they downed Wyn Davies, and inevitably everybody was around and there was chaos on. And all of a sudden, the Inter Milan goalkeeper left hooks the referee to the deck. The referee had done him for a card for what he'd done, and he left hooked him. I mean, I thought, can I see that again? And the next thing you see, the policemen with the old, the hats that come up and the heads were on the pitch trying to keep players apart, and the referee's lying on the deck. So there's been a few skirmishes. One of the classics, which you'll remember and we needn't go into, was the fight for the Northern Area Cruiserweight, the Northern Area Flyweight title, which was between Dyer and Bowyer, of course, which was not a tackle, but they tried to punch their way out of paper bags and both failed. So there's been some skirmishes at St James's.
Certainly has. Thanks for your questions, Jeff. Yvonne says, I once walked past you, Gibbo, two people of the same age after a match at St James's Park. I said hello, and you turned around to acknowledge me. Of course, we didn't know each other, but such a gent you are. There you are. That's a nice comment.
Well, that's nice because I've been called several things in my life, and it's lovely to be called, finally, be called a gent. But the whole point of everything, Steve, isn't it? Is that we're doing different jobs. Like I'm a hack, and everybody else is whatever job they've got. But the common denominator is we're all just fans.
Exactly.
And so and we all know that if you've got black and white on, we're both on the same side. So we're bound to have an eye.
We've got a news flash as well from Dean. He says, John, your old house has got an extension built on it. I live in the next street. I often used to see you. I'm sure you wanted to know that. Great stories, John.
Well, that's nice, Dean. I mean, I've got so many old houses. I'm not certain which one that'll be. Because, I mean, if I do a tour of them, I've got to start at 7 o'clock in the morning when it gets light and try to be finished in the summer by 9 o'clock at night. I've got a lot of them, but I try to visit them from time to time.
I love it. Rob says, Gibbo, if Eddie wins the EFL Cup, where does he rank in the all-time Newcastle managers for you, based on your fanzine article?
Well, I tell you what, it's there for, I mean, do they all realise? And I think they do, but I don't want them to realise too much and stop playing between now and Wembley. But if he will theoretically be the best Newcastle United manager since Joe Harvey, if the definition of being a good manager is winning something and not just entertaining. Because if it's entertaining, you've got to put Kevin Keegan and Bobby Robson way, 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 way up there. But the one now, Joe Harvey won things. If he wins a trophy at Wembley, and we haven't won a domestic one for 70 years, he automatically goes in to the top 5, doesn't he? But there again, if you're Isaac and you score 2 goals at Wembley for us to win, which Jackie Milburn did in 51 against Liverpool, then you stand alongside, shoulder to shoulder, people like Jackie. And theoretically, again, and only theoretically, above Alan Shearer and Supermac, because they won out here. So, there's such an opening for these guys. And we're still in the FA Cup with a decent draw at home to get into the quarterfinals. There's a possibility in the FA Cup this year or the League Cup. Let's take it, eh? Wouldn't it be nice? And I tell you what, it puts you lads in history from Eddie Howe to all the top players, top of the pops. It puts you right up there with the big names that have ever been in Newcastle's history. Because we've had loads and loads of quality players. But because it's a team game and it's not just about one player, we haven't always won things with those players. I mean, there's not been a better player than Peter Beardsley, but we didn't win anything. Newcastle United, he certainly did at Liverpool. And the same with Alan Shearer, etc., etc. So there's openings for so many people if they want to take advantage. And we are in a situation, the next 26 days, we can either win the League Cup and continue in the FA Cup, or we can be back looking at next year and saying, will it end next year after 71 years?
Yeah, exactly. It's coming to an end, I think. That's for certain. But when? Maybe this season, maybe not. Rob, yes, I'm not dreading it at all, mate, but we will come to that, so don't worry. Good to see Rob in the chat. He's the one who designs all of our flyers. Let's get to another couple of questions before we look ahead to the Forest game. Stephen Kennedy said, question for John, how would the likes of Joe Harvey or King Kev address this inconsistency in performance? Mind you, under Joe, we could win 5-1 one week and have it reversed the next. You know what? I've heard this twice this week. Once from Stephen Kennedy talking about Joe Harvey's team having a capacity to capitulate one week and hammer somebody the next. And George Mitchell, of course, who is our senior statesman on this channel, because of his relationship with the club, having played for the club in the 50s. He said to me that the 55 Cup team did exactly the same, John.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, the most famous thing where we're collapsing in a wonderful is when we got knocked out the FA Cup by Hereford non-league, and a week later went to Manchester United and beat Lord, Charlton and Best, who've got a statue to them outside the ground, beat them. That's the inconsistency. Joe was in charge of the Newcastle side in the 74 Cup final that won one game out of 8 between the semi-final and final, and then we're lucky to get nil in the final against Liverpool. We were that poor. It can happen, and it has happened. I think it happened less so with Kevin Keegan. There was more consistency, but it did happen, and we had the 4-3s with Liverpool, etc. And it's going to happen, but I think I'm going to just repeat one sentence, Steve, and that is, there's ways of losing and there's ways of not losing. And, the way we lost at City is unacceptable. You can't get beaten and just hold your hands up and say it was an off day or we were beaten by the better side. But you've got to, blood, sweat, and tears, you've got to give. We have always loved, we being Geordies, have always loved the artists, the great footballers, whether that's Tony Green or Hebby or Biedo or Gaza or Waddle, the real romantic footballers. But we've also loved the 100%ers that are willing to go out of the competition on the shield. The 100%ers that do the sliding tackle, the ball into the big heart that loves Newcastle United that much. We like that sort of thing as well. What we don't like is people that appear as if they might be stuck in their hand. And that's the one thing I ask Newcastle United between now and the cup final to prove it's not in the DNA, and it's not, maybe they did it at City, but they've realised and they're not going to do it anymore. That is absolute imperative, that.
Okay, Christopher, good evening. He says, question for John. Talk of Isaac leaving if we don't get Champions League. He's gone missing in our last 4 defeats. Could he feel responsible as the rest if we don't finish top 4 and want to stay and achieve it the hard way?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, as I just said, down at City, every blue chip player didn't turn up. And that included Isaac as well as the others, because it doesn't matter about your service or whatever. You can drop back, as Alan Shearer was saying, and fight for the ball. And if you see somebody like Isaac do that, then that inspires and rubs off on a few other players. There's a great feeling. Newcastle United, for the first time since the takeover, are playing catch-up. They haven't signed anybody for the last 3 windows. That means we have lost ground on other clubs that have been buying people. The club realise that now. They realise that they would lose their best players if they don't do something about it. And they're determined to hold on to the best players like Isaac and like Tonali and like Gordon in the summer and add significant players to it to have a go. Now, in theory, they can do that, because even if Isaac wanted to go, and I'm not saying for 1 second he does, because he's far from it, he's proved on occasions that he's more than happy up here, and that's wonderful. But even if he wanted to go, we can stop him going, and then we can buy the right players to go around him and do the business next season. The worry is, of course, if you do force players to stay, are they going to be happy players or are they not going to be happy players? But I would say if we continued like City, there's a lot of people would owe us and owe us big time. But, have all footballers got a conscience, or do they think they've got a short career and we'll just get on and make the best of it?
Question from Alan. What's your view about us signing so many young 18-year-olds? I think this is where the future of the club is heading, with PSR hanging over us. Another Irish player coming in, a centre forward, John. But of course, we know that a lot of these players are bought with, potential maybe to be a first team player moving forward, but also some of them are simply bought with the kind of Yankuba Minte kind of philosophy that we could buy him, keep a hold of him, and then sell him on for a profit.
Yeah, both those things come into thinking. It is the point is, when Newcastle United were taken over, they looked at what is beneath the surface, and they saw the academy and the age group sides, under 21s down to under 18s, under 17s, and they were quite dreadful. There was not enough talent coming through, and this is to rectify that. Now, if some fall by the wayside, they can still be sold on at a very decent profit in 3 or 4 years' time. But in the main, it's the hope that you're going to get people come through in the way that Gascoigne did, and so many other players have done in the past, but more of them. But this is a long-term policy. We're not going to see the fruits of all this for 3 or 4 years, in some cases with under 16s, under 17s, perhaps longer. So it's right to put in foundations. You can't build a house on straw. You've got to put in the foundations, but we can't wait exclusively for them to come through. We've got to act in the meantime to keep the boat afloat. And acting in the meantime, this will help the Saudis in the future because they will not have to pay the 50s and 60s and 70 millions in such quantities if some of these boys are coming through. But right now, there's a massive, massive need this summer to spend and spend big. And the only way to keep your blue chip players happy, and let us say Eddie Howe as well, because Eddie Howe's ever the diplomat, but underneath he is getting sick of this because he has been asked to produce miracles out of nothing season after season, and he needs some encouragement, and so do the players. The players will lose heart, and so will Eddie Howe, unless we get a few good, ready-made top players into the dressing room this summer. It's as simple as that. That has got to happen, or the players we have will lose heart. They've seen nobody come to help the cause for the last 3 windows, and Eddie Howe will lose heart, and we can't afford that. This is a massive period. If the 26 days period is going to make or break this season, the summer is going to make or break the foreseeable future of this club, the future of over the next 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, interesting stuff coming up towards the last 10 minutes of the show. So we will be looking ahead to Forest in 5 minutes. I probably have time to squeeze another question in. Paul Patterson says, hypothetical question. If you had to sell one of the following 3 in the summer, Bruno, Gardner, Isak, he says, for me, it would be begrudgingly, it would be Bruno, but let's hope there's another way. I mean, you don't want to sell your star players, do you, John, going into the next season? I mean, I get where Paul's coming from, but ideally you want to keep a hold of those 3 next year if we've got any ambition.
Oh, there's no question about that. Of course we do. But I know where Paul's coming from, and that's the road Aston Villa have gone down, haven't they? They have, last window, the window before the January, last summer, they sold a couple of the big name players, and did the same with Jovan, who was scoring all the goals in January, simply because they see the way forward is you've got to bite the bullet and get rid of a big name because you can bring anything approaching 100 million, and then you've got to put that money, reshape the team by spending that money. I don't want to spend. I don't want to do any of them, but we are in a bigger straitjacket than most because our Mike Ashley, our parting gift was to leave us done up like Houdini because of the lack of money that was coming in from sponsorship, etc., etc., etc. And I don't want to contemplate it, but like the gentleman said, he asked if we had to contemplate it. So it's easy for me to duck his question and say, well, I don't want to sell any of them, but I've already said that I don't. But if I had to, I would sell Bruno, but it would be so reluctantly. It's untrue. But the gentleman asked the question, and you shouldn't duck it. You should answer it. And my answer would be, it would be Bruno, but please, let's find another way around it.
Newcastle United are back in Premier League action. It's this coming Sunday. Because we're live on a Tuesday night, it's slightly earlier, but we're gonna talk about it anyway. It is a kick-off at 2:00. It's live on Sky Sports. And early team news, well, Sven Botman might return. Eddie Howe did tell us that on Friday. Joe Linton and Jamal Lascelles remain unavailable. As for Forest early team news, well, Carlos Miguel and Taiwo Awoniyi are both doubts. Trio of former Newcastle players could face us this weekend. Elliot Anderson, Matt Sells and Chris Wood, of course. Fresh off bagging a hat-trick last season in this fixture, is coming back to St James's Park. The last 2 away games, well, they've lost 5-0 at Bournemouth. We know how losing by a certain amount of goals against Bournemouth as it feels like. And they lost 2-1 at Fulham. The referee has been announced. It's Jared Gillette, the best a man can get. Second appearance of the season for the Australian-born official. He took charge of the 1-1 home draw against Man City. And on VAR is Peter Banks. We've already played Forest 3 times. We've done all right, John. But the home game last season, it still haunts us a little bit because it was Chris Wood. And, you know, we had a laugh on here, didn't we? Because I was always supporting and championing Chris Wood, saying there's a player in there somewhere. He continues to score goals this season, John.
Yes, he does. And I'm glad you emphasised this season. Because his 3 last season at St James's Park is more than he scored at St James's Park in his 2 full seasons here. But I mean, if it was Isaac v. Haaland last weekend, the 2 goal-scoring centre forwards, it's Isaac v. Chris Wood. And Chris Wood's actually got 1 more Premier League goal than Isaac's got. 17 to Isaac, 18 to Chris Wood. But I mean, the truth of the matter is, if we forget the personality thing, if Chris Wood comes back and he's having a magnificent season in the autumn of his career, 33, and good on him because he's a smashing lad. I wish he'd bothered to do the same while he was at St James's Park, but that was too much to expect. But this is 2 teams who are both falling off the horse and need to remount quickly. I mean, Newcastle have lost 3 of their last 4 Premier League games. Nottingham Forest have won only 2 of their last 5. They both come into this with bad defeats behind them. We lost badly at Man City. Forest lost badly at Fulham. A lot more than the 2-1 scoreline made it look like. And, you know, when Forest were doing wonderfully well early in the season, I queried on here and in the paper that they would be able to keep it going over a whole season, because they were going so well and they'd had a very good run of fixtures to do well in. I still wonder now if they can keep it going because, as I say, they've only won 2 of the last 5. The next 3 games are Newcastle, Arsenal and Manchester City. So wherever they finish, by the way, having been in a relegation fight last season, it will have been a magnificent season for Nottingham Forest. But I think they are beatable. I think we have got to go into this with the right attitude. And, you know, you look at the team. What did we do team-wise? I mean, you could change the whole team after Man City, actually, because who played well enough to deserve the place. But I'll just mention in passing, perhaps some of the things that can happen. Pope could come in for Dubravka. I'm not saying he will, but I'm saying he could. Miley could come in for Willock because Joe Linton won't be fit. Livramento could come in for Trippier. Botman could disturb the 2 centre-halves if he's declared fit enough. So there are things to contemplate. It's nice to have on the bench Wilson and Harvey Barnes because it gives options up front for later in the game. But this is a desperately, desperately important game. More desperate because the next one's Liverpool away in the Premier League on Wednesday. So this has got to be 3 points, no ifs, buts, or maybes. I'm looking for a positive reaction from Newcastle United, from the players. Forget about Eddie Howe and his team selection or whatever. I'm looking at every single player that walks out at 10-3, and I'm looking at 10-2, and I'm looking at each one and saying, what are you going to prove to me today, son? What are you going to prove to me? And you, because they owe this public to show we aren't showboating towards Wembley. We're going to get back to what we're good at, which is hounding sides, pressing hard, full of enthusiasm, full of running, full of oomph. Let's get back to that. And I am expecting that reaction because you often get it at Newcastle after a bad result. I'm expecting that reaction. And because I'm expecting that reaction, I'm expecting Newcastle to win.
I'm going to go for a 2-1 win. Chris Wood to get the first goal in the game and Newcastle to win 2-1. John, you going to go for a narrow margin or a...
Yes, I am, because, I mean, not as narrow as you. I think I'll go for a 2-0 and I'll deprive Chris Wood of his goal, and that's nothing personal. And I hope Isaac gets both of ours because it puts him above Chris Wood. And really, I find it very difficult to talk about Isaac and Chris Wood in the same sentence because they're chalk and cheese for me. One can actually play and one's a very good professional.
Great stuff, as always. Fantastic show. Look forward to seeing you next week, John. Thanks for jumping on a Tuesday night. See you next Thursday. Take care, mate.
Take care, guys. Bye.